a lot of really great advice for us. So first, I'd like to ask the panelists to introduce themselves, and we can start with Luis.
Okay. Hello, my name is Luis Longoria. I'm a third-year PhD candidate in the Department of Microbiology and Immunology at the University of Oklahoma Health Sciences Center. And so I'm in the lab with Dr. Michelle Callaghan, and we basically study eye infections. And I can probably give you a lot of advice about choosing a lab because I went through a lot of rotations.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Daniela.
Hi, everyone. I'm Daniela. I'm a PhD candidate as well. I'm in my third year right now. I go to Harvard University. I'm part of the Immunology PhD program here. And I am part of Dr. Sen's lab, which we study the epigenetic regulation of T cell exhaustion. So yeah.
Thank you. And last, we have Dr. Jose Ortiz.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me and inviting me. My name is, I recently graduated in August, got my PhD. It took me 8 years because I switched labs. So happy to share wisdom of how to choose a good lab and what not to do to choose a not so good lab. And I'm currently in Dr. Ku's lab at City of Hope in the Department of Translational Research, and we study diabetes and stem cell research.
Great, thank you very much. And thank you to everyone who pre-submitted questions. So we're gonna go through some of those. If you have any questions during the panels, please feel free to either raise your hand with the raise hand reaction or just type it in the chat and we will certainly get to it. So we're gonna just kick it off with the first, I think, very overarching question, which is, how do you determine a lab's culture? So Leo to the panelists.
I guess I can go first. So for the lab culture, I think it's very important to talk to members of the lab because those are the people who you're going to be working with for the next 4 to 5, 6 years. So if you're more comfortable, maybe go get coffee or something when the PIs aren't around so they can be like upfront and honest with you. So they're the people in the lab are the ones that should be telling you how it is from day to day. Because while you're in the rotation, they might be on their best behavior, but then that might be different once you actually join the lab.
Yeah, I guess I can go next. I will echo what Luis said. I think maybe the best people to talk to are like maybe grad students, and see how like they go, because I do think that at times PIs use different strategies to mentor individuals at different stages of their scientific career. And so I think that most likely the experience that you might have might be more similar to that of another grad student in the lab. But obviously always talking to like the postdocs and talking to research techs or anyone who make up the lab is quite useful. And I also would recommend like going and asking these people for like a cup of coffee and maybe leaving like the lab environment for a little quick minute and then going there so you can have more of a realistic conversation with them.
And if I can add to, because they already mentioned primarily everything. For me, I would suggest to also just literally look how their lab looks. Like, is it messy? Is it organized? Is it in between? That already will let you know that whether, you know, what are the priorities for that lab and especially for the PI, because the PI sets the tone to the lab. And like they mentioned earlier, talk to lab members, go to coffee, go to lunch, go outside of campus to hang out just to get to know them, see if you think, you know, you're a good match to work together, but also to, you know, maybe hang out. You don't have to, but that could help you get more information from PI. But also just looking at the lab members, how they are in the lab. Are they stressed? Are they happy? Are they focused? Like that would also let you know whether that, like what environment is happening in the lab. And just like every environment, it changes. So ups and downs, depending whether the PI got a grant or not, can also affect the environment. So just paying attention to those little details can help you determine whether that lab can be a fit.
Also, we have a question on in the chat, and somebody mentioned, is it a red flag when a lab only has advanced grad students and no first, second, third year students?
I can go first. So I would say, maybe speak to that person, like the upper grad student, and ask maybe why there hasn't been more recent grad students, and then ask whether or not it's just like a funding issue, or whether if it's like a more lab environment induced pattern. And then I was like in this situation where I'm actually the first grad student for my PI. So it was really difficult for me to gauge this. But I think that maybe just kind of talking to like your PI and like seeing where they see themselves kind of growing, or at the rate at which they're going to grow, I think that's also beneficial. But yeah, I guess coming back to the first question, I think like yeah, I would just talk to the grad student and see like what's up. So yeah.
Daniela, you mentioned that you were amongst the first grad students in the lab. There's a question that focuses on that specific concern. So can you talk about your experience regarding how you felt?
Yeah. So I think I also think it's like the dynamic of the lab. Like I think like when I entered this lab, there was 2 postdocs and then 1 research tech. And I think it depends on like how much mentorship you believe you need. Like my PI always makes time to talk to me. And that's like very like nice, because at times you do need them. But I've always like, before my time here during my PhD, I worked most closely with postdocs. So I actually feel more comfortable going to postdocs than to my PI. At times, like just because I was kind of trained like this. But it's very beneficial, I think, at times to have like a more junior PI. I would say that I was kind of lucky because my PI went through the same program that I did currently. So she kind of knows the ins and outs and like knows the faculty. And like when we were setting up my committees, she kind of had like an inside of like who would be a good person to put in my committee and all that good stuff. But obviously like you are the first one, so you kind of have to like just as they're learning how to be mentors, and like you're also learning how to like be a mentee of them, like it's kind of like a dual partnership, which I guess is for everything, but it does definitely feel a bit more and yeah, so I think that, but I think it would be very beneficial, like if you are interested in someone who is a more junior PI and you are like the first like PhD, to kind of really hone in when you're rotating, like seeing whether or not you guys think very similarly scientifically, seeing whether or not like they have the same boundaries in terms of like, your work-life balance, and like what's their definition of mentorship, because I do see that there is very different definitions of mentorship for different people, and knowing whether or not like you are on the same page for that, I think is very like important. And then I also thinking about like if you can like really work with this person for the next like 5 to 6 years of your life. So kind of gauging that and seeing whether or not like you see that yourself growing with them, or you don't really see yourself growing with them. Like I think that's very important.
Yeah, and I think that's a great segue to, and the other panelists can also chime in a related question. And I'm thinking very much about this. I'm an incoming PI next year, and so I think a lot about what rotation students are going through and what they are looking for. And so, what are the pros and cons of joining either a new lab, an established lab, and how to determine that in the short time of a rotation?
If I may, I can start because I joined a fresh for my first year PhD. I did the rotations and I joined a lab of a fresh new PI. Never had a grad student, just had an RA and a postdoc that had just joined. So when I was trying to determine the benefit of that, well, the PI is fresh, they have a lot of hands-on, they will teach you a lot of techniques, etc. So there's benefits with joining a new PI, especially if the new PI has really great ideas, really cool research techniques that are up and coming in the field, etc. That's great. Versus some more established PI, which I later switched to because I switched labs in my fourth year. So I did 4 years with the fresh PI, then I switched, and 4 years with the senior PI that I switched labs to. The senior PI maybe wasn't always like on top of the new tools, new things to do in the field, but they were totally more hands off, more chill. They weren't as pressured to maybe get a paper or a grant, depending on the funding situation in the lab. Whereas the fresh PIs they're more pressured to reach certain deadlines to, for promotion purpose. So even though that lack of hands-on from the senior PI was missing for me, I got it through my fellow lab members. They helped me, or I reach out to my committee members who are more familiar with the things I need help for my thesis. So I just reach out for help from them, and that compensated for the not always being able to get what I need from the senior PI, because they also are busy with meetings and traveling, etc. So there are pros and cons with both. I think if you are you need more hands-on training, a fresh PI might be a good fit. But if you are more independent, you don't need that much hands-on. Maybe a senior, more established PI that's not always around, but they have people around to help you might be a better fit. So that would be my suggestion.
Yeah, so when I did my rotations, I did 6 rotations. I did about half of them with new PIs, the other half with like already established PIs. And basically, just as everyone says, if you want someone more hands-on, you're probably better off with a new PI. Also, an advantage of a new PI is, since they're new, they're just setting their career up. So you can basically drive the direction of your research. So if that's something that you're really interested in, that could probably be a good way. It could be good for you. I would say I'm in an already established PI lab. So she's been around for 20 years. She's had about like 10 other grad students before me. So the nice thing about that is, so she knows the process, like what to do, and it's great because she's like 5 years and you're out. So she's like, she doesn't intend to like keep me for longer than I should be. And then even though like I do have an established PI, she's busy. She's director of vision research. There's other people in the lab that I can get help with. So we recently had a postdoc that went to industry, so he helped me train a lot. He trained me with a lot of things. We have a professor of research as well, and then like a tech that's been in the lab for 10 years. So even if you do join an established PI, there are resources to help you out as well. And then also I would recommend this mostly with a new PI, but my department has letters of requirement, letters of expectation before you matriculate into the department. So that would probably be a good way to set boundaries with a new PI. It would also help with an older PA, but probably more so you knowing like, this is what I want out of you, this is what you can expect out of me. So just like, especially open communication with the newer PI.
Great, thank you, Luis. We have a question in the chat that mentions how important is the persona aspect in a lab? Like if they have a different life, political views, and does that play any part in the science?
I would say it's kind of important to like the person who you're working with. I don't think it's like, make or break. Like at the end of the day, they're your advisor and like they're supposed to just advise you on your science and ensure that you're growing and getting closer to, finishing a project and finding your way through that. Like obviously it's nice if you like your PI. But I think it also just depends on the type of relationship that you want with your PI. Like if you want a more personal like relationship, then yes, maybe going into the nicks and cracks of what they believe is maybe important. But I think that if you are just looking for like a professional like relationship in terms of advisorship, then I don't necessarily believe it's that important, but that's my take.
If I can add to it, I think it for me was kind of important my first year because I am undocumented. So when I got accepted into grad school, the grad school year wasn't documented. I was very vocal about it, and when I was rotating, I was very upfront with the PI before I rotated. Hey, I'm undocumented. This is my situation. I have DACA work permit, so I had to educate them because they weren't familiar with that process. And so depending on their response, I would consider them. Some of them straight up did not understand my situation. So for me, that was an easy, like, this person doesn't get it. So maybe it's not the best match. And then others were more receptive. Oh, like, yeah, like that's so interesting. So how did you, they were more receptive to learn more about me and my situation. And they were more like, if they were interested, then they were more like, hey, how is that going to affect your pay? Like, can you get paid? Like, how are you in the grad school? So they just wanted to know, and I was very happy to inform them about how to go about that process if they consider me for rotation and how that would look. I also came in with a private fellowship, so I was kind of like a dollar sign to a lot of PIs, if that makes sense. So that also helps with the getting some PIs interested. But for me, that was very interesting because I want to make sure I wanted to work for someone that's understanding of my situation and will not judge me negatively about it. So for me, it was fine, but that's up to you to decide. Other than that, my status doesn't really play a huge role in my science, except traveling. I cannot go to other countries. It's too risky, so I don't do that. But but yeah, I was just looking for some PIs that would match with me in that area because that's important, especially for the work situation. And then some PIs were super chill about it, like, wow, how did you do it? That's kind of cool. So that says, that you are resilient. So I like that. So actually, for some PIs, it actually make me look good to them. So that was good. But for others, they just didn't get it. So I just avoided them. But it just depends on you and whether that is really important matter for you to discuss, like especially if you think it affect science. For me, it was more relevant for the job, like being hired and whether I can be in the US or not. Like I needed to make that clear to them that yes, I can be here for the program. Don't worry about it. Like this is how I know how to like protect myself and be okay, etc. So I would suggest to just really think deep if you think that's relevant to bring up to the PI, because sometimes it is, but sometimes if it doesn't affect the science, maybe it's not relevant to bring up. It's up to you. It's a personal choice.
Yeah, I want to echo what everyone else has said. Basically, for me personally, the personality was a big part. Because you want to pay us understanding, because you don't know what life is gonna happen, so you probably don't want to pay that like wouldn't care what's happening in your personal life. So maybe just hopefully hopefully at least get an understanding PI. So like if something personal happens to you that could affect your lab work, like hopefully at least they're understanding. And similar to Jose, I have DACA. So during my first year rotations, I would talk to people, hey, this is my situation. And my first year was like right after the Supreme Court said that it was illegal. So like you can renew, but you can't apply for a new one. So it's like my worry, what if I can't renew? But it was a conversation I had with the different PIs. And depending on their response, that's how I decided if I was going to rotate or not.
Okay, we also have a question about rotations before we go into more of the diversity topics. So somebody is about to meet a PI for a potential rotation tomorrow, and they were wondering what are the key questions.
Recording in progress.
Sorry. What are the key
What are the key
questions that you
questions
guys
that you
ask
guys
when you meet with the PIs? I can ask again. There was some sort of feedback.
I can start real quick, I guess. Honestly, like looking back at my rotations, I definitely prioritize asking questions about their science, especially for their more recent papers, because that was gonna be more relevant potentially for the projects that I may be involved. But I would suggest to just ask them the PI questions about their daily life, like how do you balance work with your life? You know, do they have a family? Do they have hobbies? Like just things like that, like just to see if they're just yeah, just to get to know them as person, because I think that's important to see if maybe that matches your kind of like expectations about work-life balance, like Daniela mentioned earlier. That's important. If you're a workaholic and then the PI is a workaholic, oh my goodness, maybe you're a match, but God, you're both gonna suffer. But if the PI has a family, of course, they probably want to leave work by 5 to go home and be with their family. So I would suggest to prioritize those things, as work-life balance is super critical. To do good science, you need to be physically, but also mentally and emotionally healthy to do good science. I've learned that the hard way. So I would suggest to prioritize PIs that really, figure out a way to survive science in a sustainable way, which is through work-life balance. So that will be my suggestion.
Yeah, I would also echo what Jose said. Ask them like their personal stuff about their hobbies and whatnot, just to see if they're not always in the lab. Maybe some more. You can ask them about their science. One of the questions I wanted to ask a lot was, what is your mentorship style? I wanted to know if they're going to be hands-on or hands-off. Especially for me in my first year, I thought I wanted more hands-on PI, but then as I did my own science, I like having help when I need it. So I kind of like the approach of I want to be independent, but if I need help or want help, I can at least have someone to approach. So yeah, just have personal questions, what their mentorship style is. You can ask about what are their expectations on their graduate students, just to know what if you would join the lab, if you think you would guys be a match, and maybe what the direction of their research is. And I guess, especially if you have more established PIs, you can ask them what have their graduate students done? Have they gone into industry or academia? If you're set with industry, you hopefully want a PI that has like some connections to industry to help you go into that direction of academia. So my PI has had people go in both directions, but it's about like an equal number.
Yeah, I think just to echo everything else, yeah, I think it's kind of important for them to kind of see the trajectory that you're probably going to go for in your career. But if you don't even know yet, then you can just be like, I'm open to both, and that there's nothing wrong with that. But if you're like, yeah, like what Luis said, like if you're really interested in industry, it would be nice for them to have like the industry connections, or if they can possibly work with you to find people who have the connections, and then, work from that, and ensure that you kind of maintain that relationship over your PhD would be kind of nice. I I don't think I asked like anything like very specific to like who they are as a person. I do think for me, I was like what type of projects do you like? I'm really interested in like, let's say like cell biology, let's say. Is that something that they're really interested in, or are they more interested in the molecular aspect or in like the sequencing, omic type of analysis aspect? I think kind of seeing where they kind of took their science and like how they would answer a certain question, like if they would go kind of gives you a little insight of like how they think about science. But I do think like what Jose like is talking about, where you are asking about like the more recent projects and seeing like what type of science they're using to answer that, I think is quite important, because I do think that that's most likely the type of scientist that you will end up being by the end of your PhD. So ensuring that you kind of want to grow in that same space, I think is also important.
So those were excellent. We had a few questions pre-submitted and now that kind of tie in with talks of expectations and maybe differences with different mentors. So the question is it a good idea to have a co-mentor PI, and how would I navigate the expectations of that? If any of you have experience with that.
I guess I can start because I've been through this. And for me, when I was switching labs, the main issue was that I just didn't get along with the PI. We had different personalities. He was a micromanager. I kept fighting him to micromanage me. And even though the science was good, it was just like we did not agree which journal to submit my paper. Even with the writing, a lot of things I really just didn't agree. So then I switched labs and I found a new PI, and we were thinking co-mentorship, but as we were getting to the details, we realized that um, my expectations didn't align with my original supervisor's expectations. So having a co-mentorship was just not going to work because our expectations didn't match. And then the other PI, the new PI, my new mentor, her expectations didn't match with his. So it just wasn't going to work. So right away, when you're trying to identify potential co-mentors, expectations need to be able to align about the projects that you're going to work on and how you're going to go about them, and also potentially the downstream target journals. Those little things also matter. So if you're thinking about co-mentorship, do your homework about the PIs and whether they're going to match. If they're in the same department, that's already a good thing. But even if they're in the same department, expectations of the work can still not match. So that's still important. And both PIs that I was talking about, they're in the same department. So it was an interesting situation. At the end, I went with my new PI, and I just completely like cut the umbilical cord for the other PI, abandoned the project. It's okay. I'm good. But in general, I think co-mentorship can be a good or bad thing depending on what each mentor brings to the table. Usually co-mentorship works great if one PI can supply the student training where the other PI lacks. So that tends to be very successful in my experience and what I've seen. But if usually one PI cannot give you everything for training, and that's okay. That's where you look elsewhere to get those things that you need training to move forward. So co-mentorship definitely provides that great aspect. You have a lot more mentorship available to you, but at the same time, it can be overwhelming sometimes because then you have to inform both and make sure they're on the same page, scheduling things. So it can be pros or if you know what you're using both mentors for, it's can be a great thing for you. If you're not sure how both mentors will help you, that can be a little tricky down the road. So it's really up to you to decide what will work for you and the training that you want and that you feel you need. It's up to you to think about it, but I would suggest to just think long term what's going to be best for you in terms of training.
Yeah, I don't have experience with co-mentors, but what I can just give you is make sure that the two PIs personality mesh well, because you don't really want to, you don't want to make it, PhD is already difficult enough, so you don't want to have like conflicting advice or like conflicting having them like just have a conflict in between. You want them you want them their personality to mesh and to them to complement what you can get from them to complement for each other. So, but that's really my only advice. I never really thought of having a co-mentor, so. But if you can find them, like, it's good, you can get good training. And also, like, if it's not possible, maybe you can have them on your committee where they can still give you some advice, even though they're not directly your mentor.
Yeah, just echoing what Luis and Jose said, I've heard that it's a lot of work. So if you don't necessarily see the benefits outweighing the cons, then maybe rethinking and putting one of them into your like committees, like your DAC or your pre-qualifying exam, I think would be more beneficial. Just because you would have to go to 2 labs, you have 2 different expectations, and it is a lot. So yeah, I think really thinking whether or not they would also work together, I think is also beneficial. But at the end of the day, like, you're going to be the string that attaches them. Are you willing to be that string? And like, you are going to most likely have to put more of the work in terms of ensuring that the co-mentorship is going well. So just taking that into consideration, I think, is quite beneficial.
Thank you. So next question that we had pre-submitted, and then we'll get to the ones that have been posted recently, is when I rotated, I personally loved one lab, but I've been told that a more senior advisor could help me more with my career, even though that rotation was just fine. What should I do?
So in my opinion, I think you should go with a lab that you feel will give you, like, will help you long term. So even though, like, they say that the lab might be established, if you really think that they can help you in the long run, you should go ahead and choose a lab you really want to. So it's your PhD. It should be a two-way street. So, like, you're going to be working for them, but then also if you're interested in doing this one thing to, like, for networking or to advance your career, bring it up to them. So, like, hopefully they'll have the funding to support you with that. So I think, even though, like, an established lab might have more connections, I feel like whatever lab you are joining, they should support whatever you want to do, because you're working for them. So hopefully they'll help you out in some other ways as well.
I don't think we can hear you. So, I think your sound got disconnected or something. Okay, now.
Sorry, is it back?
Yes, thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Sorry that happens. Just to echo what Luis said real quick, I think if you click with the PI and you did your homework about that PI in terms of, did they do a good postdoc with the PI that gave them good training, even though they're new PIs or, just new, if they also have a good idea of what their mentorship is, and if it matches with your expectations, that could be a great, lab for you to get good training. Because again, the fresh PIs, they are more hands-on, they're establishing their lab, they're gonna get good papers out potentially, but that all depends on their potential, which is determined by their background. So it's important, I think, to do the background of each PI and think about whether this fresh PI is worth the risk. You can do the risk assessment. Of course, senior PIs, they're more experienced, they know what to do, especially if they already had students, but maybe the research is not that new, not that exciting, that matches with you. So maybe it's not the best fit for you, even though they're more established, but you need to be passionate about the work because you're going to be stuck there for maybe 5 or more years. So I would suggest to really think about your priorities and risk assessment. But I would argue that young versus old PI doesn't matter. You make yourself successful, not the PI. So don't worry about, like, the connections the PI has, because they can help, but they might not make a huge difference down the road if your journey changes or whatever you want to do later changes. Just be open to the uncertainty of the future, but focus on the now, what's going to work for you now. That's what I would suggest.
Yeah, I agree with Jose and Luis. I was really in between like my newer PI that I joined, and then I was in between her and like another more established PI when I was choosing which lab would become like my thesis lab. I would say the same thing. I think as long as you find like the science very intriguing, and you know, I think one of the biggest components for me when I was going into my PhD is I want to be scientifically challenged, and finding that place that you're going to be scientifically challenged and also very passionate about what you're being challenged in, I think is very like important. And I think like as you grow, like your PI will grow as well. It's like a journey for both you and them. But I would choose, if I was in that situation, I would probably choose like the rotation that I felt that I enjoyed more, because at the end of the day, it is like 5 to 6 years of your life. And so you kind of have to be like, where do I see myself being happy and also growing the most, and seeing whether, and then when, yeah, the next roadblocks will come, but you can pass through them as you go.
Okay, so if nobody has anything else to add, I'll be going to the next question. Somebody mentioned that diversity, equity, and inclusion is very important to them, and they were wondering about ways that one could determine if the PI is truly committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion in and out of the lab environment.
So here I would say if a DI is important for you, I feel you should bring up those conversations with your potential PI. So my PI, she's a big advocate for women in science. And me as a Latino who we are historically underrepresented in science, that's something that's personally a big deal for me. So that's one of the main reasons. She sees it from the women perspective. I see it from an underrepresented minority perspective. And I actually I was thinking of joining a different lab before I did the rotation with her. Before I did the rotation, this other PI, I mentioned, I like your environment. I liked how one of your postdocs was from Argentina, which is something like I haven't really seen a lot Latino in science before. And so he kind of said something to me that was like, that kind of like turned me off from his lab work. He was saying like, it's nice that you think that my postdoc is Latino, but I need you to be more excited about the science. So I feel like you should care about the science, but then as a rotation student, you're only there for a few weeks. So it's kind of hard to be like really motivated about the science. So I just choose someone who has a record of training a diverse lab, and also she's part of like a women advocacy group in one of like the ophthalmology, and one of the biggest ophthalmology conference. So it's just basically just have a conversation with them and see if they've trained people from a diverse background and if they're somehow involved in some sort of organizations.
I can echo what Luis said. In addition, in general, in my experience, a lot of PIs just don't understand DEI. Let's be honest. They don't know what it is, but they know it's important, and so it's hard to identify. But I think in my experience, what I would suggest is just, again, it goes back to their personality and what they value in terms of like work-life balance, because I like my current mentor, Dr. Ku, she's from Taiwan. And she didn't really get training about diversity and inclusion or DI efforts back in her day. So of course, a lot of PIs just lack those skills because that's something they just never got training on. And so, but they're in positions of power. So how do they make it work, right? So it goes back to how they prioritize training, work-life balance, PIs that are micromanagers or workaholics, they tend to not be as empathic to life circumstances in my experience, whereas PIs that are more work-life balance, like let's focus about science, but at the same time you're a human being, you matter, your beliefs or whatever you go through matter. It's nice to have that option. So I would suggest to pay attention to those personality traits, but then also look at their lab website. Some PIs are being updated. They have mentorship, like DEI efforts in their website. A tab is all about diversity work that they do. Look for those things. You know, ask the PIs any diversity work that you do through the grad school or outside. Like you can ask those things, and that's fine. To ask those questions to see if that could be a good match, because like Luis said, it could make a difference for joining a lab versus another lab. So it just depends again on what you prioritize. I got very fortunate to have a PI that just happened to prioritize DEI without her really realizing it. But it just goes to show that, you know, just by talking to the PI and checking out their personality can help determine a lot of things that can match with you or not. So I would suggest to pay attention to those things.
Yeah, I think the only really thing that I look into is like their website, because I do think that like I think it's a little awkward, to be honest, to bring that up. Like, hey, like what type of DI effort, DI like DEI like efforts do you know give in the university's community or outside of the community of your institution from the get-go, I guess, like during rotations. But I think you can kind of gauge whether or not they are interested in that, like by their website. So yeah, like I only looked at their website when I was like really looking into this.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. The next question is, and we only have 10 more minutes. So I'm gonna try and rush through them as much as I can. How do you gauge how the PI feels about having a healthy work-life balance, taking time off, vacations, hours spent in the lab, etc., without it making it seem like you are only interested in taking that time off or / vacations?
I just asked them. Like I just asked them like, what is your expectations in terms of like being like in terms of like a weekly basis? Like do you expect your students and like the individuals within your lab to be there from 9 to 5, or are you more flexible in terms of that? And I think like, you know, they'll either say that they prefer their people to be there from 9 to 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. Or they can just say like, as long as you get like the science done, like it doesn't really matter to them in terms of when you come in and when you come out. So I think like just asking them whether or not like they have like a certain preference in terms of vacation. I think that you can just ask them like, hey, like I usually take a month off, or like, you know, with a month off like during July or whatever, or July I'm all off, or is that an issue in terms of like scheduling stuff? And I think like you can just say like, they most likely will just say like, again, like as long as you get the science done, that's really what they care about mostly. And yeah, I think you can I think it's easy. I also think that most of the times they mirror what they expect. So if you see them working 24/7, then most likely they will expect you to work 24/7. So you can also just set your boundaries, and like if they slack you at 6 p.m. as desirable as it is for you to like respond, setting those boundaries, even if it's like that small, I think is quite important. And like just responding to them the next morning, if it's not urgent, like, you know, if the building's not on fire or something, like if it's just like something small, then you can just wait, and then they'll realize that you want boundaries, and then you can go from there.
Yeah, I think that's just a conversation you should openly have. As well, like see their own personal life. So my PI, well, now both of her children graduated high school, but then even then she would like one of her students, not students, one of her sons was in robotics, so she would take off for to go to the robotics competition. So it's just seeing like what do they take the time off, as well as just have that genuine conversation. And again, if you need to have a letter of expectation saying, you're allowed to have this time off or whatnot, it's just hopefully they're open enough to have these conversations.
Totally agree with what Liz and Daniela said. It's hard to figure this out early on during rotation because you only have maybe 10 weeks or less. But these are important discussions you can have with the other lab members because they've probably been there for a year. So you could also get that intel through talking to them, especially the lab manager, the most important person in the lab, in my opinion, could tell you how the PI expectations are for those things. In my experience, micromanagers tend to be more like on top of your time. There was one time with previous advisor, I got sick and right away he was emailing the assistant, please take into Jose's sick hours. And I was like, wow, this is petty. I work 24/7. This one day you want to take it away from me. I was like, okay, sure, whatever. Whereas my current PI, like if I get sick, she's like, don't worry about it. Just stay home. Like she doesn't make me put it in the thing because she knows I work so much at times because I do in vivo work. So, but it just depends on the PI again. Their work-life balance, it definitely will tell you a lot about that PI and whether they have unhealthy habits versus healthy, sustainable habits. But it's a fair discussion to have with the PI before you join because you're going to be a worker. So those are going to be, things that you need to worry about as an employee potentially. Or yeah, we're employees. I don't know. I'm technically not an employee. It's a weird situation, but like they do have to consider your sick days, vacations, etc. So it's because it's obvious that you need some time off. So it's okay to ask that time, regardless whatever lab you join. Those are your days off or time off. You should be able to have that, no questions.
Awesome. Thank you very much. We have 4 minutes left and we have one last question. And Yanis is going to launch the exit poll. Please take that before you leave. So the final question is, very briefly from each of the panelists, if you can answer, how do you choose between several labs that interest you and what will make the lab I'm interested in accept me?
I guess I can start. How to choose several labs within interest? I think at the end for me, I went into what science interests me the most and what will intellectually challenge me because for me, I'm the first one to ever do high school, undergrad, and grad school. So I don't know what I was doing, but I'm always driven by science and just to understand how things work. So at the end, I joined my first supervisor's lab because I was driven by the science, this in vivo work, life cell imaging, all these cool developmental biology things that I wanted to learn. So at the end, that science drove me. Then I switched, and then I went to a lab where they study more adult stem cells, but my developmental background totally helped me survive. So that was good for me. And in terms of what will make the lab interesting you, what will make someone's lab or yeah, what will make you attractive, I guess, for that lab? You can't force people to like you, either they like you or you don't. Just be yourself. And honestly, if they accept you for you, that's great. If not, then why would you want that in your life, right? I've learned that I have been judged harshly because of the way I function. I'm non-traditional. I don't think the same as others. I've been judged that I don't have logic by other scientists because I just think very different. I used to think that was a weakness until my new mentor told me, no, that's a strength. This is what makes you unique. This is what makes you a good scientist. If everyone thought the same, that'll be boring. But if you think different, that's good because that can help you make discoveries in future. So I finally had an advocate that helped me see the good in me And I really thank her for that. And was she the most attractive lab to join? No. But at the end, I went with my gut. And my gut told me this PI, she tells me that she knows how to help me. She knows how to get me to the next level. And I'm going to take a chance and trust her. And at the end, the science was great. And if you're interested in science, you will find any science interesting. Just go to a lab that will give you good training. Keyword training. You deserve training. Don't let them treat you like any other, blind or workaholic worker that is just uses a tool. No, you deserve training. So find someone that will give you good training, because once you leave grad school, you're on your own. You got to survive in the real life, and you need to have good defense mechanisms and also you need to have confidence, because you need to defend your science. If you don't know how to defend your science, even to survive grad school, you're not going to survive outside, like in the field. So find someone that will help you build your confidence, not break you, because if you're broken, you're not going to be able, it takes a long time to get back together. So that will be my suggestion. Just go with your gut and go to a lab that will give you good training and help you build your confidence.
Yeah, I guess I'll answer it as well. If you're choosing between different labs, what I suggest is just rank them based on your personal value. So like, do you want what kind of PI do you like? Ask someone say a question like they're important. They want someone who thinks PI is important. So just rank things that of what you personally want out of PI. For me, like maybe like there's science. For me, like I didn't think I was ever going to work in the eye, but then I chose to work in the eye because of the PI, of who they were. So really, like, because it's going to be your own project. But this is my personal opinion. Because you're going to be working on your own project, you're going to learn to like the science. So for me, like the type of science wasn't really the highest priority. And as for like how you can get them to accept you, well, like you can probably express interest in their subject area. And just say that you're interested in their lab and saying that you'll keep in touch even after the rotation. Because like hopefully by the time it's time to decide the lab, they'll accept you. If they don't accept you, I will probably say it's probably because it wasn't meant to be, and you'll find a lab where you belong. So I did 6 rotations. I did the maximum amount of rotations, and I found a lab where I'm happy. So you'll find somewhere.
Yeah, so for me, I just I kind of went with at the end of the day, you're the one, like you're going through like all the classes, you're reading all the papers, you're kind of also like gauging where the field is going to go. Like, so for me, I'm really interested in cancer immunology. So I was very like honed into like, where do I think that the field will be in 5 years, and which like mentor PI would be the best in terms of getting me that technical skill set, and also teaching me how to like teaching me how to like think how they think about science. And so for me, I thought about like that, and that's how I kind of chose the people who I wanted to rotate with. And then for the lab to accept you, I think it's general vibes. So I think like if you kind of go into a rotation, it's always super scary to be the new person. And that's probably like the worst part of rotations, to be honest, is like you're always just starting anew, and like you're just constantly being the new person. And it's not a nice feeling at times. But I think, trying to really get a grasp of like who the people are, what is the lab environment, I think is very important. And I think usually what happens at the end of your rotation is you have an end of rotation meeting with the PI, and then you legit like just ask them like, I was really interested in your lab. Like, can I consider your lab in terms of when I'm choosing a thesis lab? And if they give you a flat no, then like when we said, it was not meant to be. And also you can talk to other people in the lab and be like, do you think it would be beneficial for there to be another grad student in this lab? Or do you see that kind of, do you think the environment is, or like the lab itself is like ready for a new student? Because if they are like already like, no, I think we're kind of at the bandwidth of like the PI doesn't really have much time, then I think maybe choosing another lab that might be giving you more of the scientific training that you need it might be more beneficial, but you can gauge that from just like talking to people and all that good stuff.
Amazing. Thank you very much. Those are excellent answers. We are at time. Please do answer the exit poll before you leave. And I want to thank our three panelists, Daniela, Luis, and Dr. Jose Ortiz. And we thank you very much. And if you have any additional questions, anyone attending, please feel free to email us. And panelists, maybe if you wish, you can put your email address in the chat. Otherwise, we can reach out to you. And thank you very much. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone, the organizers. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Okay,
I put
great.
the rest in the waiting room. You know, sometimes they like leave and don't exit. That's okay.
Oh,
You
sorry.
okay? What?
Wait, I thought you, what do you say?
Oh, like I just put the rest of the people